We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome to the Mark Steyn Show on your TV and on your radio. We swing both ways and enjoy it tremendously. Tonight, in the impenetrable fortress of COVID-Stan, are cracks beginning to emerge. Plus, Julian Assange's brother is here to discuss his temporary reprieve. And if Putin invades Ukraine, or maybe somewhere closer to home, he's got the Russian Navy doing exercises off the south coast of Ireland right now. But whether he takes Ukraine or County Cork, we'll be the first to let you know. Actually, maybe Putin would like to tell the Russian Navy to head down to Cornwall, hang a left, and start policing the English Channel against migrants. Just thinking outside the box here. All that coming up, and the indispensable part of the show, you and your questions and comments. Let me know what's on your mind by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweeting us at gbnews. But first, as always on this channel, The News with Polly Middlehurst.
Thanks, Mark. The top story this hour, number 10, has confirmed staff gathered in the Cabinet Room to mark the Prime Minister's birthday on the 19th of June 2020 during the first lockdown. According to a new ITV News report, up to 30 people are alleged to have attended the event, which was organised by the Prime Minister's wife, Carrie. A spokesperson says the Prime Minister attended the gathering for less than 10 minutes. Later that evening, number 10 confirmed that a second event was held, with the Prime Minister hosting a small number of family members outside within the COVID rules at the time. They denied ITV's version of events that the event was held indoors. Speaking to GB News, the Tory MP Tobias Ellwood says he's saddened to hear about this latest development.
The nation is rightly very angry by what's happened. We are in almost like a holding pattern as we wait for Sue Gray's report. I'm curious as to whether this was allowed to leak out in the build-up to that report, or whether she's now going to have to require an extension, indeed, to include the study of this latest event.
Tobias Ellwood. The United States says it has put troops on heightened readiness to deploy as tensions continue to rise in Europe. Russia has over 100,000 troops at its border with Ukraine, but denies it's planning an invasion. The Pentagon says up to 8,500 US-based troops are at their new alert status. Their deployment would depend on the requirements of NATO's Rapid Response Force. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says they could also deploy additional combat units in response to Russia's military build-up.
We are ready to listen to the Russian security concerns, also in the Baltic region, but we will not compromise on the right for every nation to choose its own path.
Jens Stoltenberg. Here, the Transport Secretary has announced that post-travel testing in England will be scrapped from the 11th of February. That's ahead of the half-term school holidays in England. Speaking in the House of Commons, Grant Shapps said that double-vaccinated passengers arriving in the UK will no longer need to take a lateral flow test. Shapps also said travel testing has outlived its usefulness, as Britain is now one of the most vaccinated countries in the world.
Today, I can confirm to the House, Mr. Speaker, that our international travel regime will also now be liberalised.
Grant Shapps. In the United States, 3 former police officers who were on the scene of George Floyd's murder in May 2020 are on trial in the States. They're accused of violating Mr. Floyd's civil rights by failing to provide medical care when fellow officer Derek Chauvin knelt on his neck for more than 9 minutes. Chauvin received a sentence of 22.5 years for George Floyd's murder. 2 of the officers are also charged with failing to stop him. On your TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Now more from Mark Steyn.
Well, there were protests against lockdowns and mandates all over the Western world this weekend, in London, in Washington, across Europe, in Canada. And people should protest, as Lord Frost said on this show on Friday. It is a major public policy failure, if by public policy you mean stopping the virus. If instead you mean destroying life, normal life, family life, business life, it's been a huge success. Look at these guys getting the old tear gas and out on people protesting in support of normal life. Look at these guys. This has been a moral crime. These last 2 years have been a moral crime by the government against the governed. A lot of people get the lesson of King Canute wrong. Canute was, I think this was sort of circa 1016. He became King of England, if you don't do that in school anymore. Dates stick with me from many years ago. Canute was trying to teach his courtiers an important lesson in the limits of kingly power. So he ordered them to set his throne down at the seashore, and he commanded the incoming tide to stop. And instead, the tide came in and waterlogged his brogues, and he spent the rest of the day squelching around the palace. And his courtiers got the message: there are things even a king can't do. Today, we live in an age of literal Canutes. When he accepted the Democrat nomination for president, Obama declared that to future generations, this would be, quote, the moment when the rise of the oceans began to slow and our planet began to heal. Well, the oceans declined to cease rising, even for Obama. So a decade later, Canute Johnson, a prime minister who cannot stop the tide of unvaxxed immigrants washing up on the southern shore in an age of lockdown, declares that if only we commit to net zero and the full COP26, the rise of the oceans will begin to slow. Definitely, for sure this time. You can take it to the bank. Why don't you try, I don't know, relieving congestion on the M25? And if that works, then get back to me about changing the very heavens. In Her Majesty's Antipodean dominions, the Prime Ministers of Australia and New Zealand commanded the very virus to stop at the water's edge. And the result this day is that every single kangaroo and kiwi is hopping around dripping with Omicron. But if they can't control tides and viruses, they can control you. In the United Kingdom, according to the geniuses of Sage, this week was supposed to be peak Omicron, just before Christmas. They were predicting, I just want to make sure I've got these numbers right. They were predicting that right now we'd be seeing 600 to 6,000 deaths per day. The ICU's overwhelmed. All the usual rubbish that's been as wrong can be for the last 2 years. Except that this time the government said, what's the big deal, and decided not to play along. So here we are. And it's starting to feel a little different, isn't it? Opinions that not so long ago got you banned from Twitter and Facebook are now suddenly respectable. Oh yeah, the virus did come from that lab in Wuhan, like all the conspiracy theorists were saying 2 years ago. Turned out to be true. At the protests yesterday, one wag had a sign saying, "Did the BBC's credibility die of COVID or just with COVID?" of COVID or with COVID. This was a distinction unrecognized by government statisticians for 2 years. In Orange County, Florida, a COVID-positive man in his 20s died in a motorcycle crash, but his death was added to the toll of the Wu flu because, as the chief medical officer put it, one, quote, could actually argue that it could have been the COVID-19 that caused him to crash. Has Putin got the Omicron? Is that why he's so eager to take Kiev? The only COVID-positive person to die of non-COVID was just mentioned by Polly in the news headlines just now, George Floyd in Minneapolis, because that's how far you had to go to get a death recorded as merely with COVID. Now, even Sajid Javid is saying the COVID corpse numbers were skewed. They weren't the only bogus numbers. The Treasury Minister, Lord Agnew, just quit because nothing's going to be done, he complained, about 5 billion quid in COVID business grants sluiced off by fraudsters. Right now, the Labour Party ought to be sitting pretty. The Tories are salivating for one of their once-in-a-generation acts of suicidal regicide. And Sir Keir is well positioned to be the dull, decent old stiff who inherits by default. But they don't get it, do they? Here's one of Labour's tweets on Partygate, which actually should not be called Partygate, but should actually be called the last 2 years have been a disgraceful abuse of a once free people that have screwed everything in sight gate. But be that as it may, look at this. I remember 20th of May 2020 vividly. I spent hours on the phone to a man who was in the hospital car park, utterly desperate to see his wife. He begged, wept, shouted to be leapt in, but we said no for the greater good of everyone else. She died unexpectedly and alone as the government had a party, says Jenny, a purported NHS nurse. Why is Keir Starmer holding up Nurse Jenny as a hero? There was no need to torment a poor man whose wife was dying. Why on earth would even the Labour Party venerate someone who does such a thing? That's the lesson of Partygate. Our rulers didn't follow the rules because they knew the rules were junk. And while Nurse Jenny was traumatising that fellow in the car park, no one was doing anything about the regime that actually inflicted all of this on the world. We were told we had to treat the pandemic like waging a war, but instead of doing a single thing to the enemy, Chairman Xi and his Politburo, cowardly Western governments preferred to wage war on their own peoples. True, signs of a COVID climb down are not universal. Jacinda Ardern's inmates in New Zealand have just been told that quarantine now means 24 days in isolation. And to show how responsible she is, she's postponed her own wedding. If you think 24 days of lockdown is tough, imagine what that poor guy... Oh, no, that would be terribly ungallant of me. Perhaps, after all, a great reckoning is coming for 2 years of human rubble being piled up. In notoriously litigious societies such as the United States, there will be the usual multi-gazillion-dollar lawsuits, but elsewhere, finger-in-the-windy politicians are beginning to grasp that the balloon of inflated COVID death statistics has been punctured, that the excess deaths from untreated cancer and heart disease will in the end be higher than COVID, that the mental health issues from 2 years of mask mandates, home confinements, and other institutionalized abuse of our children will be with us for the remaining years of this century, and that all this is the result of improper American research offshored by public health panjandrums to a dodgy lab in Wuhan. What do you reckon? You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at GBNews. We've done terrible things in the name of public health. Here's a former Canadian foreign minister being arrested for pushing back against lockdown.
I'm going to place you under arrest right now.
Yeah.
Right now you're under arrest under the provincial health orders. Okay, so if you can just put your hands behind your back, face towards the vehicle. Okay, give me one hand here. I'll get you suspended. you have any weapons or anything on you, sir?
Weapon? No, no weapon. Only,
Anything on you that's
only
gonna
my
hurt
words.
me or anything like that?
Sorry?
Anything on you that's going to hurt me or anything like that?
No, no, anything will hurt you. Only my words, only my philosophy, only what I believe in.
Okay. All right, come on.
That's great. Do you have any weapons? No, only my words. Here now is that one-time Minister of the Crown and current leader of the People's Party of Canada, Le Parti Populaire du Canada, Maxime Bernier. Maxime, nations are reacting differently to this Omicron. And it seems that Canada in particular has decided to double down on all the craziness. And even by the crazy standards of Canada, your beloved province of Quebec is right now crazier than almost anyone in the Western world.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right about that. It's very sad. In Quebec right now, the Quebec government said that the unvaccinated people will have to pay a tax, a vax tax. It's unfair, unjust, unconstitutional. And actually, people are fed up with that in Quebec and also all across the country. I was in Toronto last weekend. We had a huge rallies, one in Waterloo, one in Toronto. More and more people are coming. Because also in Ontario, the restaurants are closed. If you don't have your vaccine passport in Canada, you cannot travel by plane or by train across the country. It's very difficult for me as the leader of a national political party, like you said, the People's Party of Canada, to travel and do my job. I don't recognize my country anymore. And I'm not alone. Now we have more and more people that are coming. And they understand everything that you said in the beginning. It's true, the fear was very efficient here in Canada, and the federal government and provincial governments spend a lot of money in propaganda, ad, and now I believe that they just want to put more restrictions on us. Actually, today, I cannot go to a restaurant in Montreal. I cannot travel as an unvaccinated person. So we are very fed up with that. And I hope that what is happening in UK right now, I hope, first of all, your vaccine passport will end. And maybe that will put some pressure on our Canadian government. But the big debate this week in Canada is the truckers. As you may know, truckers were essential workers in the beginning of the pandemic. They were able to cross our borders from the state to Canada, to the United States, and they were very important for our economy. And so that's why the federal government said these workers are essential. These truckers, are essential workers. And now the federal government is imposing a vaccine passport on truckers, and about 20% of them didn't have the 2 shots. So the truckers are very mad at that. And in Ottawa this weekend, next weekend, we'll have a big protest over there, a big rally. And I'm supporting the truckers. They're essential. There's no logic there because, they're alone in their truck. They're not putting anybody in danger.
That's right.
So it's crazy what is happening here in our country.
Are you surprised at the way Western governments? Well, let's just take France. Monsieur Macron started by saying that the unvaccinated were not citizens. They were not citizens, which is an odd thing to say in a democratic society. Then we have the Germans declaring them enemies of the state. Also an odd thing. By comparison, Monsieur Trudeau, who simply dismissed them as racist and misogynists, is the soul of moderation. Are you surprised at the way democratic leaders are so eager to demonize millions of their own citizens?
Yes, and actually, it's very dangerous, that narrative. During the electoral campaign in Canada last September, Trudeau was very clear. and he said there's good Canadians and bad Canadians. The good one, the vaccinated one, the bad one, the unvaccinated one. And I said during that campaign, no, our goal is to unite everybody under the freedom umbrella, and we must respect the freedom of choice of every Canadian. And now you have that narrative, not only in Canada, in France, like you said. Macron said, je veux emmerder les Français. I want to piss them off, the one that didn't have the vaccine passport. So it's very dangerous, and I hope that more and more people are coming on our side. And that's, in Toronto last weekend, we had a lot of people, family, and now the vaccinated people are coming and are saying like us, enough is enough. We must stop that. And we are not in a communist country in Canada, but with these leaders, Trudeau and all the provincial leaders, they are acting like authoritarian politicians, despots. I never was able to imagine that in my own country. But now we are fighting for our way of life, for our freedoms. And I can tell you, I'm doing my best to win that war. And I believe that we will be able to do that.
Are you surprised at how craven the media have been? I mean, the BBC has excluded a whole lot of stuff. You know, it's been very intolerant of people who express different views on the origins of the virus, the lab leak thesis, and even when one of its own presenters was actually appears to have been killed by the vaccine, they didn't want to cover it. The ABC in Australia is in some ways even worse. But the CBC in Canada, I think, actually may take the biscuit on this because they have been the most slavish to what is now proven to be an officially discredited narrative. You know, all the whole deaths with COVID, of COVID, the inflating of the death numbers, the people with real diseases who weren't seen by the health system because the health system prioritized COVID. I mean, are you surprised at the way the media, even in the sort of Canadian craven media thing, and actually even the Quebec media too, have been so utterly pathetic on this?
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm not surprised with the CBC. You know, the CBC received $1 billion a year to promote the government, you know. And now all these media in Canada, they received a lot of money from advertising, from the different provincial governments and the federal government. And we had only one narrative in these media. So that's why the propaganda from the government was very efficient with the help of the media, the CBC. The CBC didn't, you know, for the first time, I believe the rally that we had in Toronto, and that was not the first one. For the first time, the CBC decided to cover it a little bit, and but you know, the numbers, they were playing with the numbers for the numbers of cases in the beginning, the numbers of deaths, the number of people in the hospital. So we cannot trust the mainstream media in Canada anymore.
Do you think, just to switch while I've got you here and with your former foreign minister's hat on, this is all happening at a rather unstable time in the world when Putin is apparently serious about taking Ukraine, and certain members of the Western alliance, such as Germany, no longer seem quite so Western as they were. It looks almost as if they're making plans for a post-American world. This seems an odd time for us all still to be talking about you know, whether you need to get a test before you fly from Paris to New York or whatever. Do you think we've taken our eye off the ball on the broader global scene?
In Ukraine, we must understand the geopolitical situation. And I believe that Russia has some concerns, and we must try to have a discussion about it. But, you know, we are not for going to war. for Ukraine. There's other way that we can deal with that. The most important for us, for Western countries, is our civilization and the influence of China. And, I'm more concerned about China than Russia. So, we have that woke culture everywhere, the China influence here in Canada, and that's concern. That's, the concern must be there. And in our civilization, what's happening right now with COVID and the censorship, it's something that will have an impact on our civilization for the next couple of years. So I hope that we will be able to have an agreement. But I'm not a guy that's going to say, we need to go to war against Russia. We don't in Canada. We must have our foreign policy that will be in line with the interest of our country. And I don't believe that it's in the interest of Canada to go to war for that conflict.
That's a very novel concept these days, a foreign policy that is in your national interest. I must ask you just this, finally, Maxime. I mentioned this almost as a throwaway last week, but I got an awful lot of emails from people who were interested in it. As you know, Boris Johnson and the British Conservative Party are in a bit of trouble at the moment, and people are saying that Mr. Johnson may well be gone very soon. And I didn't like a lot of the alternatives. And I reminded people of Andrew Bonner Law, born in what was then Kingston, New Brunswick, who became the first and to date only Canadian Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, leading the Conservative Party. And I just threw in that you might like, now that Boris is loosening up flights to Heathrow again, that you might like to get on a flight and run for the UK Tory party leadership. Do you want to just keep that in your back pocket in case the nation cries out for you?
I appreciate that. But the problem right now is I cannot fly. I'm not vaccinated, and all these draconian measures don't help me to do my job. But I appreciate that. I'm very busy to try to regain our freedoms here in Canada.
Okay. There he is, the prince across the water, unable to take a cab to Dorval Airport in Montreal and board the plane. What a world we live in. Allons-y, mon brave. À la prochaine, Maxime. Coming up, we have Naomi Wolf on some of the internal contradictions of COVID land, and straight ahead, Julian Assange's brother on the Lord Chief Justice putting temporary brakes on his extradition to America. Plus your views. Ask me anything for Stump the Steyn. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Don't touch that dial. We're coming right back.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hey, let's get straight to your tweets and emails on the question of the parlous state of the West. Alan says, the West? Well, Cornwall is doing just fine. I was there last year. It looked great. You should go there right now, Alan, because as we mentioned at the top of the show, the Russian Navy is in those waters off the coast of Cornwall and Ireland, doing exercises. So that sound you may hear may be Russian gunfire the next time you visit Cornwall. Jay says, is it too late to save the West? Not as long as Droopy Joe is in charge. The point is that Droopy Joe isn't in charge. He's just a dead husk of a moth-eaten sock puppet. So the question is, who is waggling Joe Biden around? Who's got his hand up the dead husk of a moth-eaten sock puppet? Is it Chairman Xi? His family have extensive business interests, I think is the polite phrase, in China. Is it those globalist nutters meeting at Davos? Whoever is in charge of the West, it certainly isn't Joe Biden. But by the way, it's not just the personality thing. There are bigger things going on here as well. So you can change the leadership of the G7 or whatever, and there are still crises that we need to do things about. A Twitter user says no, but it'll take a major change in government and the system needs gutting. Well, it's funny, the last 2 years, isn't it? They've gutted every single other thing. They've gutted international travel. They've gutted small businesses. They've gutted the right to go to hospital for anything but the Chinese virus. And yet the one thing that hasn't been gutted is the system of government. On that subject, Roe tweets, this nurse, I think this is Nurse Jenny. Nurse Jenny, the Labour Party's favourite nurse, because she let some poor guy sit out in the car park weeping and howling and begging and refusing to let him in for a few last moments with his dying wife. That's the Labour Party's idea of a hero. Go on, Sir Keir. If you think she's that great, stick her in the cabinet. Make her Lord Privy Seal or whatever you do when you get in. But Roe tweets that nurse should face a tribunal. She won't, because they did it everywhere, not just in hospitals in England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, not just in Australia, Canada, America, Europe, all over the Western world. We really need, what was that thing they had in South Africa? A Truth and Reconciliation Commission. A Truth and Reconciliation Commission for all the victims of these last 2 years, not just the victims of the virus unleashed on the world by China, but the punitive measures unleashed by Western governments on their own citizens. Keep your emails and tweets coming. Stump the Steyn will be here a little bit later. This morning, the Lord Chief Justice of England ruled that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has what my learned friends call an arguable point of law of general public importance that he should be allowed to raise before the Supreme Court. Mr. Assange is in HMP Belmarsh awaiting extradition to the United States' dirty, stinking, rotten, corrupt federal justice system, which is where justice goes to die. As Conrad Black has pointed out on this show, the feds win 95% of their cases without even going to trial. No country with a fair justice system should even consider extraditing to America's feds. As I've said many times, Mr. Assange is an Australian subject of the Crown who owes no allegiance to the US. If they can't keep their lousy secrets, that's not his problem. Unfortunately, he embarrassed them, so they've spent years out to get him, determined to get him, determined to get him to an American court and put him away for 125 years. Now, today's win isn't a huge win. The Supreme Court may not take the case, that's their call, but a small win is better than a one-way ticket on federal airways. Returning to the Mark Steyn Show is Julian Assange's brother, Gabriel Shipton. Gabriel, it's good to have you here again. Just give us your takeaway from the court's decision today.
Well, the court has found, as you said, a point of general public importance in that US gave extremely weak assurances at the High Court level, and those assurances weren't able to be tested. And so the High Court has said that would have repercussions to other extradition cases that fall under this lopsided extradition treaty. And so they've recommended that the High Court, that the Supreme Court hear this point of law, that assurances need to be put under the microscope and evidence presented at a magistrate level.
Well, as I understand it, as they are at the moment, those assurances are worth whatever they're worth, and you know what it's like in that federal justice system in America. Who's to say how they can be changed and modified and all the rest of it in the years ahead? Do you think the Supreme Court is going to take your brother's case?
Yes, I believe they will. I think this point, will have repercussions to other extradition cases from that are requested from the US. Say like Mike Lynch, or the Autonomy founder who's undergoing extradition proceedings. The UK shouldn't be extraditing to these prison conditions in the US, which are tantamount to torture. Solitary confinement that is extended over long-term period. All your communications monitored, your legal communications monitored. One visit a month, one phone call with family a month, all monitored by the authorities. So these prison conditions in the US, the UK shouldn't be sending people there because it's a torturous murder system.
Yeah, and even the sentence he's facing, which, as I said, I think it's 125 years, it might be 175 years. But, there is nothing like the US. The US justice, you're sitting in Sydney. If you're in New South Wales or you're in England, there are broad similarities between the justice systems. The United States federal justice system is really a thing unto itself. Are you worried about, not just about justice, but are you worried primarily about your brother's health? In other words, if once he lands, he's in terrible conditions and he's basically on a death spiral down there.
Yeah, that's right. In October, Julian had a stroke in Belmarsh prison. Every day his health deteriorates. Every day he's in prison, his health deteriorates. He's been now in Belmarsh over 1,000 days as an unconvicted remand prisoner. He's not serving a sentence. He's held there solely at the request of the US DOJ. So they're requesting that Britain hold this unconvicted prisoner in the harshest prison in Britain. So you can imagine what awaits him in the USA. We know that there were plots and plans to kidnap Julian from the Ecuadorian embassy by the CIA. There were even plans to assassinate or murder him by the CIA. These are the people that are requesting his extradition. So if he was to be extradited there, who's to say how would he be kept safe? Where the UK, the US DOJ is requesting the UK extradite Julian to a place that was planning to kidnap him from his refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy. So there's no guarantee that he can be kept safe. It's like, it's handing somebody to the people who want to kill you. The injustice is amazing.
Yeah. That's an important point. The reason they're going through extradition is because they tried to take him out the old-fashioned way, and it failed. They tried to kill him. They tried to get to him to kill him, and they were unable to kill him, so they've been forced to go through extradition. But the likelihood of your brother making it to trial when you have some of the most powerful agencies on earth already having been shown that they plotted to kill him is slim, I would venture. Thank you, Gabriel, and Godspeed. Congratulations on this narrow legal victory, and I'm interested to hear what the Supreme Court has to say about it. Still to come, Stump the Steyn. You can ask me anything you want. You can tweet me at GBNews. Also coming up, Naomi Wolf, a liberal feminist in the age of COVID. Straight ahead on The Mark Steyn Show.
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, as the issue of trans athletes is thrust back into the spotlight with the success of swimmer Leah Thomas, one of the world's most famous trans voices and athletic superstars, Caitlyn Jenner, sits down with me for a world exclusive interview where she'll also discuss her political future and being trapped in the middle of the culture wars. One of Australia's most revered conservative news hosts, Rita Panahi, joins me to share her view on whether the country she loves will ever return to normal. And I break down the headlines of the day with my superstar panel, the Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, social commentator Esther Kraku, and senior reporter at the iNewspaper Benjamin Butterworth. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
GB News on TV and radio. Whatever's your bag is cool with us. Lots of talk about COVID passes and vaccine mandates, but my next guest says it's way bigger than that. It's a battle for the human soul. Dr. Naomi Wolf is an international best-selling author. She has her own Substack. If you're an habitué of Substack, she's on Substack mainly because she's been vaporized by the social media enforcers. Naomi, it's always good to see you. I read your latest piece with great interest, and you single out your fellow liberal feminists for some criticism because of a fairly obvious contradiction. As you rightly note, it was legal decisions about privacy rights that led to the legalization of abortion in the United States, which you're a supporter of. I'm not a supporter of abortion, but I understand the point you're making, which is about consistency, and that the same women who say keep your hands off our bodies when it comes to abortion are now saying get your hands on that guy's body over there because he hasn't been vaccinated, and hold him down and stick him with 2 shots and the booster shot and whatever else you need. That there's a fairly obvious contradiction here. These guys, a lot of your friends, a lot of American liberals don't seem to get.
Yeah, well, you're characterizing what I wrote accurately. It's been quite a journey for me. I'm a lifelong Democrat, a classical liberal. I believe that the progressives were the party of virtue compared with the alternatives. And sadly, in the last almost 2 years since the pandemic, I've seen elite center of progressivism and cultural production after elite center of progressivism and cultural production say yes to a discrimination society, a wholesale discrimination society without a murmur, be okay with child abuse, masking children, silencing them, making it hard for them to breathe 8 hours a day, every day, be okay with the state mandating an experimental injection that has not passed clinical trials in order for people to keep their jobs and feed their families. And these are people who are super right on, stand up for all the right things, believe in marriage equality, are anti-racist, are, believe in gender equality, and they're completely okay with a situation in which I cannot walk into a restaurant in New York City and millions of other people, disproportionately Black and brown people, cannot walk into buildings in New York City, participate in social life because of medical status. So it is super ironic, people who shop at Whole Foods and only buy organic are completely fine with offering up their children's bodies to this experimental treatment. And people who are advocates for gender equality have abandoned, including Justice Sotomayor, Justice Kagan on the Supreme Court in the United States, have abandoned in the same breath, this long-standing tradition of my body, my choice, my decisions about my body are between me and my doctor, which are essential to the abortion rights movement. So yes, the hypocrisies abound.
Has it been personally painful for you? You and I spoke on American telly. I think it was sometime last year. It's certainly less than a year ago. And you were talking about a movement at that time of, as I think you put it, liberals and conservatives and independents who all were opposed to what's going on. This latest essay in Substack seems to make the point that it's actually your friends on the left who have gone along with all this statist intervention in everyday life. Are you feeling a little bit lonely in that sense? Is there a way back to your old chums when all this is over, if it's ever over?
Well, it's not strictly personal. I think many people in Britain, across Europe, in the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, this is happening to former members of free civil societies everywhere. Which of us hasn't had a friendship breakup? Which of us has not had rifts in our families between people who are wholly drinking the Kool-Aid and people who are asking critical questions? I think the splintering of civil society is happening everywhere. I personally think it's intentional. I think some of these policies are intended to divide us, to exacerbate divisions, to break up families, to break up friendships. Having said that, there is a huge realignment going on in the United States, and I think across Europe as well, where the old labels, left and right, really are meaningless. Republican, Democrat are meaningless. People are waking up to realizing the real enemy is tyranny, and the real ally is whoever will stand up next to you for the Constitution or for human rights in Great Britain and in Europe. and that's more important than fringe or side issues that divide us ideologically. Having said that, it is sad to me right now that overwhelmingly the people who are speaking up, standing up for freedom of speech, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, bodily autonomy, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Equal Rights Act, which forbids all of these mandates, they tend to be conservative or libertarian in the United States. And there are plenty of liberals seeing that what's wrong is all around us and it's bad, but unfortunately, it's few and far between that they have come forward, with a few noticeable exceptions. There have been some voices on the left, Barry Weiss, Glenn Greenwald, myself, but you can count them on the fingers of one hand, and the reasons are stupid. People say, I don't want to be otherized. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to, that's real, but it's not as real as global tyranny. I don't want to stop being invited to my bridge club. I mean, these are people who don't understand the nature of the danger that we face as a Western world, North American world.
It's true what you say in America. It's also true, very much largely the same, I would say, in the UK, in Canada, in Australia, in Europe. And so maybe you're right that this will ultimately lead to a fundamental realignment. And those old left-right definitions that have prevailed for a couple of centuries now simply won't be relevant to that world. Your essay, one of the reasons I recommend is because it starts off narrow and personal. You're at a little gathering in rural upstate New York, and then it widens out to the big geopolitical picture, and then widens out even beyond to the infinite. Because you say this whole business has actually made you rethink God and eternity.
Yes, that is correct. I did write that, and that is true. It's hard for me to kind of get used to talking about this in public because I'm a, thoroughly educated Yale, Oxford intellectual, and you're not supposed to have a faith life in those worlds, at least not in public. And so it's hard for me to say that, I'm really turning to God for answers these days. And this is very personal. I would never proselytize. I'm Jewish, so we're on the receiving end of a lot of proselytization. So I'm just speaking for myself. But basically, I've been looking at this global tyranny now for 18 months from every direction and analyzing it. And I understand a lot about it. But it is so complex and so elaborate and so elegant in a way and deployed on such a massive scale that it really kind of is Miltonic in its evil. It kind of goes beyond what I'm familiar with as just bad politics, ill-conceived, destructive human policy. Human beings aren't smart enough, I believe, to come up with this vast structure that has almost enslaved beacons of human liberty, freedom of speech, and human rights in less than 2 years. So I really kind of reached the reluctant conclusion that this monumentality just feels like an evil that's manifesting on a human, rational, understandable plane, but kind of has layers and layers that seem kind of metaphysically evil that we really can't grasp on just a human scale. And that if something this bad was pursuing good in this world and dividing families, suffocating children, going after civilization, everything that makes human beings dignified and beautiful, that it kind of reinforced my sense that there was a good God that it was trying to suppress. So I have been kind of out as a person on a faith journey, I'll put it that way.
Well, let me bring it a little down to earth there, Naomi. Do you think, because it's true that tens of millions of people in free societies, whether they're American or they're French or they're German or they're New Zealanders, have been quite happy to go along with this tyranny? Do you think that's because a huge, benign, all-powerful state for many of these post-Christian societies fills the void where God used to be?
I think that's respectfully a little reductive. But, and there's a lot wrong, you know, like, again, I'm a religious minority, a member of a religious minority. We don't want the state and religion to merge. I mean, that's the beauty of what the founders of the United States set up. There is no established religion, unlike in Great Britain. And that's good. But I do think we've seen a war on the right to value faith. And, you know, Robert Kennedy Jr. said this really beautifully at this massive march on Washington yesterday, in which he said, you know, liquor stores were allowed to remain open in the lockdown and churches were forced to close and synagogues and mosques were forced to close. But liquor stores are not mentioned in the Constitution and churches are. I don't think it's accidental that some of the biggest beneficiaries of this tyranny are the Chinese Communist Party in an unholy alliance with big tech and certain leaders in the West. And the hostility of communism to the divine, to God, you know, goes back to the founders of communism. God is a very powerful empowerer of resistance. And that's been true throughout history. You know, tiny groups of oppressed people, if they had faith and they had each other, were able to topple massive evil empires again and again and again. And so I don't think it's an accident that Board of Health board members were kind of seated throughout in the United States on boards of synagogues and churches and prevented them from opening. I think there's been an intention to dissolve places where people gather to worship, just like there's been an intention to dissolve other forms of assembly that empowered people, like in Parliament, in town halls. You know, I go to state legislatures across the country where they're meeting by Zoom. It's all part of the same effort. That's all true. That's all true, and it's terrible. We're out of time, Naomi, but I'm glad we finished on some big and profound stuff, which we don't always get to on daily news shows. Thank you very much, Naomi Wolf. We are all out of time. And that'll do it for me. You are in the very best of hands for the rest of the evening. Dan Wootton is here to make your Monday for 2 groovy swinging hours. Stay safe, stay free.
Good evening. A remarkably similar day tomorrow. It's again going to be cold. If anything, probably feeling a little colder than today. Grey skies for the majority, but not much rain around. Main exception to the dry story will be across the northwest of Scotland, where we do have these weak weather fronts. High pressure has been dominating, and under it we've got a lot of cloud trapped, and it's not really shifting very far because the winds are light. We've seen some breaks in the cloud over northeast England, eastern Scotland, and if we keep those breaks tonight, we could easily see temperatures dropping below freezing. But even where it's cloudy, it's going to turn quite